The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, Sidney Crosby is being evaluated for an upper body injury. He suffered the injury against the New Jersey Devils on Tuesday. He was able to come back to the game, but he did not practice on Wednesday. A lot of people waiting with bated breath for what could happen for him on Thursday. Pretty weird time, or not weird time, but pretty precarious times considering the Four Nations face-off is next week. CJ, what do we know about this injury right now?
Well, that's exactly the point here. There's no time on the side of any player that's dealing with an injury at this stage. The countries have to register their rosters by Tuesday, the day before that tournament begins, Wednesday, with Canada playing Sweden. And so, obviously with NHL games ongoing, perhaps even as you're listening to this right now, I mean, this is a kind of a time of fluctuation. And so when it comes to Sidney Crosby, what I would say is there's concern now about his potential availability for this tournament. Mostly because, he got through Tuesday's game after kind of that awkward collision with the Devils. It seemed like everything was okay post-game. And then Wednesday, woke up not feeling great and went for some subsequent medical evaluation. And so, everyone's being extremely careful here. I don't want to read too much into that, mostly because I get it. No, there's the reality that perhaps they just don't know yet if he's going to be able to play. But obviously, it's just down also to the fact that this is an important event for Sidney Crosby, along with some other players, which I'm sure we'll get to shortly, that are in similarly unfortunate positions with their health. And, you can imagine he's going to do whatever he can to make sure he's there. And so at this point, I just think the fact that no one's saying, there's a good chance he's still going to be there. I mean, it's definitely, at least to some degree, up in the air at this point.
We know how much Sidney Crosby means to Team Canada at all of these international tournaments he's been a part of. But obviously, if he's not able to partake, there's going to be this massive hole up front for this team to fill. Can you go into more detail about what a potential loss of Sidney Crosby, as obvious as this question sounds, how much that would impact Team Canada and who would step up to replace him?
Honestly, I think it hurts the tournament more than it hurts Team Canada. We've waited so long to get back to, and I know this is not a true best on best. I'm calling it sort of a top tier international event. Obviously, a lot of the best players in the league are going to be there, and certainly the best players from each of the four countries that are part of this. Sidney Crosby is a flag bearer. I mean, he's meant to be the oldest player in this event. From any of the players named to any of the rosters, he still carries a lot of weight. I think in the hockey world, in the sporting world, he's going to wear the C for Canada. Assuming he's still there. I don't want to speak about anything in the past tense. I mean, the idea of potentially losing him is I think it would really hurt the overall vibe around the tournament. I mean, look, injuries are part of the sport, though, too. And saying that, and so this does happen. For Canada, I think if they need to replace a forward, whether that be Crosby or if it turns out it's someone else between now and next week, I think Mark Scheifele is the most likely player to get the call. He's second or third, I believe, among Canadian players in goals this year. He's right up there with points. He's been a leader for the Jets, and the Jets have been, right at or near the top of the league all season long. I think that it's a relatively easy decision if Canada needs sort of, we'll call it forward, that brings some offensive elements to the game. And when you're talking about Sidney Crosby, that's part of it. Mitch Marner, who I think is going to be okay for this tournament, I should say, but missed Tuesday's game in Calgary for the Maple Leafs. Like he obviously would be brought in and put in some sort of offensive role. And so I think in a world where either of those two couldn't go, Scheifele would make a lot of sense. I mean, maybe if it's more of a depth penalty killing type of forward, it might be a different discussion for Hockey Canada's management group. But, I assume they'll approach that the same way they are right now with the vacant spot that Alex Pietrangelo now, has been out of for 9 or 10 days or so. They're going to use, they being Hockey Canada and the management team, as much time as possible to make those decisions, to make sure they have all the info on the players that might be coming in, and obviously to get a sense of where everyone's health is. And so, I don't almost want to open the black box yet, because it might be getting a little ahead of ourselves at this point, because we've certainly not heard any reason to believe that Sidney Crosby won't be there. But it's not good for a guy who's had this great stretch of health to have just this weird collision, within a week of the start of the tournament.
It's wise to not open that black box, because the next question after that is, well, who wears the C, or how much of a bummer is it going to be for Crosby and McDavid to not play together?
Yeah, that would be a bummer. I think it's pretty obvious to me the C would go to McDavid in that case. I mean, right now, McDavid and Makar are the two alternate captains. I think it's pretty easy to slide it over to 97. That would probably be, of all the things that fall out of this, if they have to make that call, I think it's probably the easiest of the decisions. But, it's obviously not a decision Hockey Canada wants to make. And so much of the anticipation of this tournament for me has been the idea of seeing, some of the greats of today versus, I don't want to say Crosby's not a great of today anymore, but, seeing kind of a blend of this, I think that's something that's been lost by this period of almost 10 years now without these international events. And so, I don't say this as a Canadian or anything like that. I just think from the standpoint of the event, something big would be lost if 87 can't be there.
100%. And we'll be sure to update that as that story develops. Team USA, there's questions around the health of one Quinn Hughes. He has not played since January 31st. He has a lower body injury. He won't play Thursday against the San Jose Sharks. What can you say about his chances of representing the United States at the Four Nations?
Well, Team USA's had to start planning for the possibility of life without Quinn Hughes, I think, because of the nature of what he's been dealing with. And look, this is a guy that's having another potential Norris Trophy type campaign, arguably a Hart Trophy-like campaign, and he's been known to be gutting it out, for the last several weeks here. There's lots of shots of him with sort of a splint or something on his hand, and yet he was playing monster minutes and slogging through what was a difficult stretch, for the Canucks, and it's just terrible timing. He got to a point he could no longer go. There was a game last Sunday. He took the warm-up, couldn't play in that one. Tuesday's game, he took a skate before the team's official morning skate, ultimately sat out the game, and now he didn't even travel to San Jose for Thursday night. And so that's all trending in a tough direction with the same parameters as the Crosby discussion, and that there's not a lot of time. And so, I do think that USA Hockey is sort of, whether officially or unofficially, tapped Jake Sanderson and said, hey, be ready to go just in case. Much like Crosby, the same qualifier goes on here. Quinn Hughes wants to be at the Four Nations tournament. I mean, he's a USA Hockey guy through and through. He's tabbed as an important member of that team. His brother Jack, of course, is part of the team. I mean, he's going to do anything possible in his power to play. And so, one thing I'll point you to is Rick Tocchet mentioning, these next 48 hours being important for Quinn. And so, we'll see where he's at, not just Thursday when he's not going to play for the Canucks, but maybe Friday. If there's any way that his, even just a little bit of time off the ice or a little bit of time not playing these NHL games has put him in a position where he can try to play at that tournament. But, tough set of circumstances for him because he's played through so much, and never a good time to get injured, but this is a particularly bad time if you were, geared up for that tournament.
Yeah, geez. Again, not getting ahead of ourselves here. Stuff could change. They're still about a week away before the tournament starts, but a tournament without Crosby or Hughes, for varying degrees, obviously, but big bummers all around if those two are not able to represent their respective countries. And already we've had to talk about guys like Miro Heiskanen not being available for Finland, as an example. We mentioned about Alex Pietrangelo, who has an ailment. He says he's not going to take part. At least you touched on Mitch Marner and the possibility that he's likely still going to be available for Canada. But yeah, so for whatever reason, I guess it's part of the game. Injuries are part of the game, but I don't like feeling nervous about these players so close to this tournament starting.
Well, and there's even a couple games on Sunday this week. So, it's possible really right up until, Team Canada is meant to practice Monday in Montreal. Right up until the window of when that first practice happens, there could be some potential questions about players, or someone could get injured on Sunday. I'm not trying to will that into existence in any way, shape, or form, but it's just the reality of what's going on. And, Sweden had to replace William Karlsson. Fortunately, they had Rickard Rakell, who's been an absolute heater for the Penguins, and it's actually Sweden's second leading goal scorer this year behind William Nylander. So, in some cases, I think at least if there's an injury, you can get, a pretty worthy player on the roster, just because, I still find it odd the rosters were chosen on December 2nd. I just think, each country, but especially the US and Canada, where they were picking from a much larger pool of players, might make a few different choices today if they were able to let it go down to the end. One idea I thought of is, and this is all hindsight, but how cool would it have been if they left 3 open roster spots for each country that were going to be picked right before the tournament? Say each country had still an open forward, defense, and goaltending spot. First of all, that would have created all kinds of positive momentum, because we would have spent the last month talking about who's hot and who's not in those races for those countries. It would have been, still an open question of how you fill the team. And, would have just, I think, generated a lot more news about the tournament heading in. And it also would have given the management groups, an ability to make decisions now, because, especially you look at the Canadian goaltending. I mean, it's hard to ignore, Logan Thompson's season in Washington is just outrageous. I mean, it was good on December 2nd. It's something altogether different, 2 months later here. I mentioned Scheifele earlier, that I think he would be probably the first call for Canada. I mean, he's, he could be one of the highest scoring Canadians at this break and potentially isn't going to the tournament. So, anyway, I mean, I should have had this idea 8 months ago and told someone who could do something about it. But it did occur to me that there's a missed opportunity here by having to name the team so early. And then, of course, now we get down to the last week, and someone even who suffers a minor injury just might be taken out of the event because, if an NHL player misses a week, we barely bat an eye about it, right? The team calls them day to day. They miss a couple practice days, a couple games, and they ramp back up and go again. Well, if you're day to day at this stage, you're missing potentially 1 or 2 of the games in the Four Nations. It's just not worth even, going at all.
100%. I love your idea, by the way. I imagine that you still need to have some kind of reasonable deadline date. I don't know if you want that a week out from the tournament, maybe 2 weeks out, but I love that idea of leaving spots open. And you could turn it into a TV event. If you're watching Hockey Night in Canada, for example, that's where the teams would announce those 3, who's filling in those 3 vacant spots. You can turn it into a way to generate interest about the tournament, as you mentioned.
Well, my proposal, I would have it be announced on TSN just because.
That is very true. That's very true.
That's right. Although it wouldn't make much sense, as we know, because the games won't be shown there. But I'm just saying, if it's a TSN proposal, the announcements get made on the TSN or maybe on our pod, Julian.
I would love the idea of us being a exclusive conduit for news. I would love that very much so. Let's get that up for the next Four Nations face-off, Siege.
Absolutely.
100%.
So, anyway, we're going to get some of these last-minute announcements anyway, it would seem. I mean, obviously, there's been a few injury replacements already for Sweden and Finland, and there's a possibility here that Canada and the U.S., unfortunately, might get in on the action as well. I mean, certainly Canada's going to add a defenseman soon. I still think Drew Doughty is the most likely player to end up taking Alex Petrangelo's spot. But, one thing Hockey Canada wants to be sure of with Drew is that, that they don't replace him and then need to replace him again, because he's only played, at the time of this recording, 3 NHL games all season, since coming back from that fractured ankle he had in training camp. And so, I think that they want to see him right through to the break to make sure that he feels up to the task. But it certainly seems like a lot of signs are pointing in his direction to fill that spot on Canada's blue line.
1 assist in those 3 games since his return, but let me read you the time on ice in those 3 games. Make sure I get in the right order here. Okay, from game 1 to 3, 23-51, 27-43, and then 24-16. For a guy who hasn't played at all to this point this season, there's no easing in with Drew Doughty. He is playing. He almost played 30 minutes in one of those 3 games I mentioned.
And those were 3 of 4 games in 4 days, all on the road. So travel between each of them too. So, I mean, it was, it would be a tough stretch for any player at any point in the season. But coming off the layoff that he had, his previous meaningful hockey game was played on May 1st when the Kings were eliminated by LA last year, by Edmonton last spring. So it was a long time between games for Drew. And I think at this point, quite honestly, Hockey Canada is putting some trust in him. Just what's your body telling you? You've been through this before. Do you think you can be at this level? I mean, I think there's a level of consultation there, because let's face facts. And I mean this with respect to everyone else under consideration. I mean, no one has Drew Doughty's resume that's in this conversation. I mean, no one has the cups, the Norris Trophy, let alone all the international experience. I mean, Drew Doughty has been the NHL's per game ice time leader 5 of the last 10 seasons. Before this year, if you look at the last 10 years, no NHL skater has been on the ice more than him. This is he's just a solid obviously he's an aging defenseman, but he still has, I think, a degree of trust that Hockey Canada would have in him is off the charts. And what's interesting, I should mention too, Julian, Canada now only has 2 right shot defensemen. So when they add, Doughty or McKenzie Weegar or Chris Tanev, whoever it might be, that player will be only the 3rd right shot defenseman on the roster. And so I think that those players, whoever gets put in that spot is going to be expected to play. Even though, there will be a defenseman scratch for each game, I think it's likely to be one of their left shots that's sitting out, again, assuming everyone's healthy and it's not an injury-related decision. And so, you really need to be sure because Team Canada particularly likes to balance its pairs with right and left shots, playing on their strong sides. And so, that's why the health question, Doughty has played those minutes you mentioned in 3 games, but I think they want to be sure that he hasn't had any kind of, setbacks or anything that might limit him, at a tournament that starts next week before officially naming him.
Okay. We'll be up on anything 4 Nations over the next couple of days as you're definitely going to be in Montreal for the tournament. Are you going to Boston too?
Yes, sir. I'll be in both venues. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to that too. Okay, let's move on to Ryan Hartman. Coming through on Wednesday, the NHLPA has filed an appeal. I'm reading this off the Twitter account. The NHLPA has filed an appeal on behalf of Ryan Hartman regarding the NHL's disciplinary decision to suspend him for 10 games. The Department of Player Safety gave him that suspension after roughing Tim Stützle of the Ottawa Senators over the weekend. Fined a lot of money for that altercation. Your thoughts on Ryan Hartman appealing this decision?
Well, it's probably the easiest appeal the NHLPA has ever had to launch, or one of them, in one of these circumstances, if only just because, as you mentioned, as a repeat offender, any game he gets back, Ryan Hartman, if this is reduced, is $48,000 plus in his pocket. So just purely on that fact, I would say, even though it's a pretty involved process, it's worth going through the process of your Ryan Hartman, just because if they take 2 games off, you get almost $100,000 back in terms of what you're docked in salary. And of course, there's also, I think from the end of the player side of this, there's, you want to make sure you're getting basically judged fairly. And I think it's got to be said, the NHL Department of Player Safety came very hard at Ryan Hartman here. And I don't know if you watched the video, Julian, but a lot of those videos follow a certain pattern. Obviously, we had fun with that when you got your ball hockey suspension last year. Mm-hmm. That they're sort of almost like they're almost like paint by numbers a little bit, what they're going to say. Well, the Ryan Hartman one went off script, I would say. And player safety was very clear about how they arrived at that number of games. And they really emphasized in that video, I mean, first of all, what Ryan Hartman did that they didn't appreciate, that he took his right hand off the stick and basically you put all his weight on Tim Stützle's neck and back and drove him into the ice. But they really leaned into the fact that this is his 4th suspension, his 7th time. He's been 7 fines previous to that. That averages out basically to 1 piece of supplemental discipline for every 60 NHL games he's ever played. That now he's been suspended 3 straight times where he's been considered a repeat offender, which I think the unspoken part of that is you're not learning your lesson, man, because when you get that repeat offender, when you have that tag, you're actually being docked at like 2.5 times as much for each game of suspension you get. So, they really leaned into what's an unflattering history when it comes to dealings with their department. And, that is codified in this collective bargaining agreement that, that basically suspensions get worse for players that show that they can't curtail their behavior, essentially, that they keep crossing the line. And so, 2 interesting parts of this. The first appeal would be heard by Gary Bettman. But assuming he keeps it at 6 games or above, there's also the option then to take it to a neutral arbitrator. And so, we don't see a lot of suspensions over 6 games. And so only a handful ever get to a neutral arbitrator. And then in that case, it's not the league itself making the ruling on the number of games. And so, it's way too soon. I mean, I'm not qualified to guess if he will get games knocked off, but just the way the process works and given the amount of money at stake for Ryan Hartman, it does make a lot of sense to at least try to see if you can shave a few bucks off and a few games off of that ban. Sure.
I just thought the play, I was in the building for it. It was a very dangerous play. And I'm not surprised, considering that he is a repeat offender, that he got the suspension that he did. The fact that it's a lot of money, almost $500K. Look, I get it. Try to get some of that money back, but I would be very surprised if games were docked off. If he got some of that money back, it'd be surprised.
But you don't know, and I'm not coming at you. None of us know but how a neutral arbitrator will view it, right?
You're absolutely right.
I'm with you. I don't expect Gary Bettman in the initial appeal to change the view on this. But you go to a neutral arbitrator. I mean, that's someone just outside of this process, right? It's someone looking at the information freshly, and I think there's even a world where games can be added in that process, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not predicting that will happen, but the point is you put it in the hands of someone who's not really part of the normal justice spin of the justice wheel. It'll be interesting to see where that lands. The other part of it, quite often, Julian, while this plays out, even if games get knocked off, which has happened in the past, usually the players sat out that number of games. But the interesting wrinkle here is that we have the Four Nations tournament. Yes. So I don't know when the 10th game is supposed to be, but it's obviously well on the other side of that Four Nations event. It's possible that this will actually work its way through the gears of justice, and there will be a ruling of some sort before Ryan Hartman's actually served the 10 games, which is rare in and of itself. Anyway, that's more of a footnote than anything. I'm with you. I'm certainly not out here trying to condone the action. I mean, I think given his pattern of crossing the line, he clearly deserved a significant suspension. I don't think there's any debate about what he did in this case being worthy of a suspension itself. But, would 8 games have been enough? I mean, that's where the debate comes down to. 9, 7. I mean, look, I'm not in this. This is look at it. There's a time I was pretty clear when Connor McDavid got suspended. I didn't like the number of games. This one, I'm just sort of like throwing my arms up. I'm like, yes, he deserved to get hammered, and he got hammered. 10 seems about right, but we'll see if that, passes through the court of justice here. That's, as that process moves forward.
I love the wheels of justice term that you've administered here. Just plays on the wheel of justice I keep bringing up with the DOPS. Anyway, glad to see we're on the same page.
That was a strong video, though, if you didn't get a chance to watch it. Like, that was like...
Yes.
That was, again, some of them are just... It almost feels like it almost feels like an AI voice sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, there's not a lot of emotion in it. That one kind of felt like we mean this. And it even said, like, Ryan Hartman claimed that he was just trying to stabilize himself. And he's like, we disagree. It's like he made this argument and we're calling bullshit. And then we're going to give you a 10-game suspension. That's basically what the 3-minute video boiled down to.
That's what happens when you have to deal with a habitual line stepper like Ryan Hartman. I think it's fair. And we agree on that. We'll see how it plays out with this appeal that came down on Wednesday for Ryan Hartman. What can you say about the interest surrounding center Dylan Cozens? I know he's been linked to the Calgary Flames for quite some time. He fits that profile of a right shot center between the ages of 18 and 23. But in the last few days, we've seen a few other teams add to the list of potential suitors for the Buffalo center. What can you say about Dylan Cozens?
Well, I'm not clear why this has become such a talking point in the last few days. I mean, I guess other than maybe because there's been other trades and then people are looking around to say, like, what could be next. Because I don't have any impression that anything's changed in terms of his status with the Sabres, Dylan Cozens, recently. Look, teams have known that Buffalo needs to be open to trying to make changes to that team. That goes all the way back to, a couple of months ago. Terry Pegula flies into Montreal as a team meeting. I mean, they're right near the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings yet again. And it's my understanding like 20 teams have called on Dylan Cozens this year. That includes some of the ones that have been out there, whether it's Calgary, Vancouver. I think Montreal has poked around. Toronto has made a call. Detroit. I mean, 20 teams. I mean, we actually should start listing the ones that haven't bothered to call versus those that have. And here's the real rub, though. What Buffalo has told the teams that have phoned and the ones they've engaged with is that they want to trade a similar player back if they are going to deal Dylan Cozens. And they don't have to deal Dylan Cozens. I mean, he hasn't had a great season individually, as they have not collectively, but he's signed long-term. He's still a young player. The reason 20 teams are calling is because they see a lot of promise in him and have, seen that he's had a 60-point campaign already during his career. And Buffalo values all those things in him too. And so I don't know if you go through the list of teams that have been linked to the Sabres, like what's the trade? Because again, what I'm hearing in this case is the Sabres aren't going to take a package built around a great prospect or even a good couple prospects for Cozens. Like they want a player. And so I think that really limits the field in season of that type of move happening. If you're going to take the Canucks, it made sense when that was part of maybe dealing Elias Pettersson. Again, not that it would be 1-for-1, but that was part of the package. That the fit there made a lot of sense. Well, now the Canucks aren't moving Elias Pettersson, at least not in the short term. And so what else would Vancouver trade off its roster that Buffalo would want that would get them Cozens? I mean, I don't know that you can get there. I think Calgary's in the same spot. I mean, even after the Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee deal, the Flames would love to add another center. Obviously, they're still thinking the same way. They're not looking for expiring deals. They're looking for players that can be part of their team. Dylan Cozens looks great. But what could the Flames trade? Where's the actual deal there? And so, I don't mean to stamp on the rumors, but I do think we have to be realistic about them. I mean, I know whenever the Leafs are linked to anyone, everyone goes nuts. Well, it's like Toronto doesn't have anything here that would make sense. They don't have a player up to Cozens' level that would be off the roster. I mean, I guess it would be something like maybe Matthew Nyes, but I mean, there's no way I could see Toronto doing that. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Matthew Nyes for Dylan Cozens, you wouldn't do?
Well, I'm not even. This is us talking. This is not a. But I'm just saying that's the kind of deal that it's going to take, and it might even be more than that from Buffalo's perspective. Like I guess my point is how many really good teams are going to trade a really good player off the roster right now to get Dylan Cozens? Look, I think that kind of trade takes on a whole new complexion when you get to the offseason. Teams I think are willing to do different things at that point in time. They're looking at maybe the longer range in that moment. So I guess where I'd say things are with Dylan Cozens right now is the Sabres are giving away for futures, and a lot of teams are calling, but no one is giving them back a player that the Sabres think is as good as Dylan Cozens. And so, with that being said, look, Dylan Cozens is on the trade board. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible he's dealt. I just don't think it's incredibly likely at this point in time unless one of those teams really steps up and with an offer. And I don't think that's happened just yet.
For the content aggregators, please don't run with Nyes for Cozens. That's just the name CJ threw out there. Well, I'm just saying that's the only kind of player off the top of my head that might start to make sense. And Matthew Nyes is having a breakout season right now for the Leafs. I mean, I think there's an argument. Like, let's have a conversation about Matthew Nyes. He needs a contract this summer. He's well on his way to a 30 goal campaign, rather. Mm-hmm. He's 22. I mean, there's an argument when we talk about players left off Four Nations, like Team USA might like to rethink, hey, would Matthew Nyes be better on our fourth line than some of the players we took as sort of depth forwards for that event? I mean, I think Matthew Nyes, there's an argument to be made that he's part of the Leafs core now, where he's growing into a spot where you're looking at him as being part of that. And obviously on his next contract, I think that'll be reflected. So, I don't know. I don't want to say more because now we get in this territory. It's like we cross between opinion and fact. And I'm just saying that it would take a real good player going back to Buffalo to get Cozens out of there. Yeah, we don't want you to get radioed on your own podcast, Siege.
I know. I probably just did myself in there. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. You didn't. I'm sure people will show mercy on the internet. No one runs with stuff like that and acts crazy and overreacts. People behave. Well, I think the worst is that maybe Steve listens to this and then in the group chat he's like, "What?" Like that's probably what's going to happen. I can live with that.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess my point is I don't think. Well, the Leafs have been attached to him. I don't think there's not a lot there. You know what I mean? I think that there's other teams maybe that the trade might make more sense. Maybe another struggling team, maybe another team that's looking to shake things up. But it's going to be hard for a team trying to contend this year to make that trade because they're not going to want to weaken themselves in the process of making it.
Before we get on out of here, Siege, do you have a stick tap?
I was hoping you would start.
I could.
Doug gave my homework.
I will give. It's been a while since you didn't have a stick tap right away. You know what? I'm actually impressed. Good. This run of stick taps where you just had it ready off the dome. Very impressed.
Where I was prepared.
Hey, it was fun while it lasted. I'm going to give mine to Jonathan Quick, the first U.S.-born goaltender to reach the 400-win plateau, achieves that mark over the weekend. It's a question of when, not if, he'll reach the Hockey Hall of Fame. We know about the Stanley Cups in his resume. We know he's a career backup. He's a backup now, but the fact that he's been able to continue to play at this level and reach that milestone, I think that's really big for him. So Jonathan Quick, very deserving of a stick tap from myself.
I'm going to go a little outside the box maybe and give my stick tap to Patrick Waugh.
Ew, okay.
And the reason I do that is quietly, and I've seen a lot of debate in the online sphere, the Islanders have climbed their way back into a playoff spot. I think Patrick Waugh has put himself in position to maybe, be up for another Jack Adams award. And, most people had sort of counted the Islanders out for dead. And, they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. They're patching holes. They're making waiver claims. And through this time, that team is really, I'm trying to give a stick tap here to the Islanders themselves for coming through that and going on this run. But, at the same time that I'm about to put out a new trade board with Brock Nelson in the number one spot, who's a rental player from the Islanders, they're trying to play in a way that would compel Lou Lamoriello not to be dealing away his veterans and to keep going for it. So I'm going to stick tap the Island, which, sometimes gets overlooked a little bit. And I think, the coach has done a pretty nice job there with a team that really was pronounced dead or forgotten about. And again, outside of their market, maybe in a national lens. And then all of a sudden you look down, you're like, they're 8-2 in the last 10 and look out. So I don't know who's going to win this Eastern Conference race. We've ridden the highs and lows. Montreal surged in and has fallen back. The Senator team you're covering has managed to stay above water there. Obviously, Tampa and Boston are kind of right on the line, in one day, out another day. Columbus is still knocking around. Yep. Give them credit, but even more injuries for the Blue Jackets anyway. The Islanders are now in the mix too, along with Detroit. No one's actually had a better record since Todd McClellan was hired by the Red Wings on Boxing Day, 15-4-3, and now all of a sudden they're in a playoff spot. So good for the Islanders. Good for Patrick Waugh.
Patrick Waugh, if he wins a second Coach of the Year trophy, I might just open the show just laughing because that would be hilarious. It could very well happen. That's hilarious.
As you know, the Coach of the Year doesn't usually go to the best coach in the league. It goes to the guy who coaches a team like the Islanders, or and I say this with respect, but if Dean Evison somehow gets the Blue Jackets in, he's for sure going to get votes. I'm not saying he'll win because it depends what happens elsewhere, but it's often the surprise teams. And I'm not saying it's not even earned. It's just usually the surprise teams are the teams that has a goaltender who has an otherworldly season. And so,
Spencer Carberry. Spencer Carberry's going to get Coach of the Year votes easily.
Oh, he should. Yeah, absolutely.
He's probably he's the front runner for that honor.
But yeah, anyway, it's still too early because, as I say, teams are rising and falling. Maybe if Detroit keeps this up, there's going to be some case for Todd McClellan coming in mid-season. It could be a lot of things here still. But I'm just stick tapping the Islanders because. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone. I'm looking for teams hey, are they out of the race? Are they trading everyone? And could I put 10 more players on the trade board? And they're defying gravity here this last little bit.
Defying gravity? Isn't that from the Wicked musical? You watched the movie?
I did not. I just
isn't that?
It might be from that, but it's a coincidence that I use the term.
Oh, okay. All right. So you weren't dropping a Wicked reference. Okay.
No.
All right. I
did see the play on Broadway and Juliet, though, recently.
Okay.
Which was quite good. I think written by the same guy who wrote Schitt's Creek.
Okay.
It was very clever and it was very entertaining. So I'm by no means a theater reviewer. So there's probably 10 better shows to go watch in New York right now. But the one that I saw during my recent visit was well worth my time and enjoyed that 2.5 hours.
Coming to an episode of the CJ Show near you, CJ's Pop Culture Corner. We will dedicate time for you to talk about whatever bits of pop culture you've gotten yourself into. Great work as always. Thank you to everyone who listened in. Get your questions in now for the next episode of the CJ Show, as we always start off the week with Ask CJ. Get your questions in, whether you're on X, Blue Sky, Discord, Message in a Bottle, Telegram, however, you know what?
Hey.
Like throw a rock at Steve Dangle's house if you have to. Go ahead.
One last thing. What's your Super Bowl pick, bud?
Ooh. Kansas City, 28-24. That is that's my pick. Kansas City wins. First team in the Super Bowl era to win 3 in a row. They will make history. What say you?
I can't reveal it here, but I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'm in a picks pool with a lot of other people in our business. I've got a chance to be in the money. Basically, we've picked every game throughout the playoffs.
Yes.
And some of them likely listen to this podcast. So I don't want to show my hand because it could affect how other people end up going we're all around, trying to grab one of those cash prizes. So it's not because I'm being elusive. I would like to get in the money because honestly, I've done this pool, Julian.
Yeah.
I've probably done it each of the last 10 years. I don't think I've ever been in the money. Like, I'm so bad at it that I just feel like even a third place, just give me a token third place finish here. Like, I'm not going to win the thing, but
you look so excited about this.
Go Chiefs.
All right. We'll keep it on the low. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody. Talk to y'all next week.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.